Hello, I'm Karen Blackley. Welcome to Alpha's inaugural author interview. Alpha is the professional women's auxiliary to the Assistance League of Fullerton, California, serving people in need. Since 1992, Alpha has hosted a Day of Authors, a live event where prominent authors inform and entertain over 600 guests that are book lovers. Due to the pandemic, we have had to shift gears, but we are continuing with Day of Authors by going virtual. We're glad you've joined us along with our moderator, Maureen Lee Lenker, and three authors, Christina Hobbs and Lauren Billings, the duo that write as Christina Loren, and author Rufi Thorpe. For over 25 years, Barnes & Noble has been our partner in making our authors' books available. We encourage you to purchase the author's books through Barnes & Noble by calling 714-871-9855 and asking for the Alpha coordinator. Here to welcome you is our Barnes & Noble point person, Janine Esposito. Janine?
Hello, I'm Janine Esposito, the Barnes & Noble point person for Alpha's online author interview. We have partnered with them for the last 28 years at their live A Day of Authors and are very proud to be partnering with them for the inaugural online event. You can support Alpha philanthropies by purchasing the author's books. Please call 714-871-9855 and ask for the Alpha coordinator. For people who are close to the Fullerton, California store at Amridge Heights, either call or come into the store, mention Alpha event, and we will give them the credit. We look forward to continuing our partnership with them as they move forward into their future events. Enjoy.
Thank you, Janine. Maureen Lee Lenker is a journalist, writer, producer, director, and sometimes actor currently at Entertainment Weekly. She has written for Ms. Magazine, The Hollywood Reporter, Turner Classic Movies, and many others. She holds a master's in entertainment journalism from the University of Southern California and a master's in British history from the University of Oxford. When she's not covering books, movies, television, and theater, she's either at the beach, writing her own fiction, or watching a classic movie. And now I'd like to turn things over to her, and she will introduce our authors. Maureen?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special event. My name is Maureen Lee Lenker, and I am a reporter from Entertainment Weekly, and I am very excited to be here today because my Nana was a member of the Assistance League for my entire childhood, so I have very fond memories of your organization and very honored to be a part of this. And now I want to introduce our special guests, these amazing authors that are here with us today. Christina Loren. Christina Loren is the combined pen name of longtime writing partners and best friends, Christina Hobbs and Lauren Billings. The duo writes both young adult and adult fiction, and together has produced 14 New York Times bestselling novels. Their books have been translated into 30+ languages. They are the #1 internationally bestselling authors of the Beautiful and Wild Season series, Dating You, Hating You, Autobiography, Love in Other Words, Roomies, Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating, My Favorite Half Night Stand, and The Unhoneymooners. And our other guest today is Rufi Thorpe. Rufi Thorpe is a gifted writer in the modern day adult and young adult genre. Her plots explore the challenges of young adulthood and family dynamics. Her first novel, The Girls from Corona Del Mar, was longlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize and the Flaherty Dunnan First Novel Prize. Her latest, The Knockout Queen, is described by the LA Times as a dazzling and darkly comic novel of love, violence, and friendship. She takes a familiar plotline, a pair of teen misfits from an unlikely but life-altering friendship, and turns it into an arrestingly original, darkly comic meditation on moral ambiguity. And that is a quote from Kirkus. A stunner of a novel, The Knockout Queen is beautiful, sad, optimistic, and fully engaging. So welcome, Christina, Lauren, and Rufi. So wonderful to have you here today.
Hello.
Let's start things off with a pretty basic question. Why did you all want to become writers, and when did you know that's what you wanted to do with your life? Rufi, let's start with you.
So I think that I always loved writing. I mean, I was a big reader, and I think that for me, the seed of any kind of writing comes from loving books and just being a reader, and books being this like safe and magical realm kind of. But I didn't think that I could really make a living at it. I kept trying to figure out some other career path where I could do that. And then like I'd teach, and then in the summers, maybe I could write books, and it got to the point that I was like gonna apply for like a PhD program in philosophy so that I could write novels in the summertime. It didn't make any sense. It was like packing a silk scarf for a parachute. It was just like a really bad plan. So then I was like, well, I'll just apply to graduate programs and see what happens. And so I did. And then, but even up until I sold my first book, I still didn't think it was a really reasonable thing for me to be doing. And I feel like just insanely lucky every day that I get to do it.
Amazing. And Christina or Lauren, whichever one of you wants to jump in first on that.
I did not start writing for fun until much, much, much later in my life. I was 32, and I was recovering from a hysterectomy and was in bed and stumbled upon fan fiction. And I didn't have anything else to do. And so I started reading these stories, and it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen, that there were just these women writing stories for each other for fun and building this entire community. And like I was just absolutely hooked. And I started writing a story, and it was just so much fun to just do something that just had no rules. And I met Lo, and we met in person in 2009 at San Diego Comic-Con and just hit it off, and it just went from there.
And I'd been writing my whole life pretty much as a hobby. I'd been writing, I didn't realize what I was doing was writing fic, but I was writing like Days of Our Lives fan fiction in my journals when I was younger. And, and like in college and grad school, I was writing Buffy fic. And so I think I just hopped around fandoms and did it kind of like as a hobby. But my career for many years was in science. I got my PhD in neuroscience, and I had sort of planned to just be in research my whole life. And when fan fiction kind of took over my brain for a while and I got really into it, I met Christina and we decided to write a book. And then it was like at some point we were publishing so fast and it was doing well, we had to decide which path to take.
Yeah. Well, for all of you, CeeLo, you write stories, love stories and romance across a bunch of different audiences, from YA to adult romance with a capital R. And Rufi, you are writing books that are about young people and adolescents, but not necessarily for younger audiences to read. But how much does audience play into your writing, and how much are you thinking about that while you're writing?
I mean, for us, we are entertainers. We are in a commercial genre. We love what we do. We love writing romance. And so we absolutely think about our audience. I think romance writers, maybe more than other genres, have a contract with their readers, which is that they are going to get a happily ever after from us. And so we have to keep that in mind when we're crafting our romance stories, but it's not hard. I mean, giving readers a happy ending is what we would want to do, whether or not they expected it, But I do think we like to think about what would we want to read as readers? What are the stories that aren't on the shelves that we would want to pick up? So we absolutely keep the audience in mind.
So I think that when I started writing, I didn't think about the reader. I mean, I thought about wanting it to be engaging, but I was really writing for more like in this abstract, almost like a confessional, like you're in the dark box talking to the only person that you think could ever hear you, like it was very like emotionally intimate to me. But because of that, I didn't think of the reader as being any specific person. And then one of the magical and wonderful things about publishing a book is you get letters from readers and you find out who your readers are and who like it and what they're making of it. And so it becomes much realer and more concrete, kind of thinking about the readership for a book. But even then, like, I guess the thing that I love most about books is that they can't control who picks them up and reads them. They're sort of loose. And so I love it when especially I hear from a reader who's not at all who I was picturing, and I'm like, oh, what must this book seem like to, you know, an 18-year-old boy or something that I wasn't thinking about necessarily when I was writing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. I love that.
For all of you, because I feel like you explore this in all sorts of different ways, what is the difference between writing about young people and writing for young people?
I think that when we are writing for young people, we are so much more careful. I mean, we're always careful. We never want to offend anybody, hurt anybody, represent anything, incorrectly. But there's just so much more care, I think, in like when we were writing autobiography, we were so careful. I don't think we've ever had anybody like read something so many times, so many readers, and just so careful that we were getting that message, right. I don't know the difference writing about young people. I think maybe trying to make sure we don't sound like we're 40. That would probably, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, especially with autobiography, there was a level of responsibility we felt, not just because it was a teen audience, but also because it was a queer main character, narrator, and because he's male. And we played around issues of religion, faith a lot. And so, that more than anything, I think we wanted to make sure we got it right. But I do think, we put a different amount of research and stuff into autobiography than other books. But I think in the end, we want all of our books for our readers to feel seen in them, whether they are like us, or if they've come from a completely different background. We want readers to be able to see themselves in our books. So we try and be careful with that.
I think that my books have like a lot of darkness in them. And I think that if I were writing them for a younger audience, I would feel more anxious about that. And also anxious. A lot of what I'm interested in is moral ambiguity. And a lot of the characters in my books are like really likable bad people. And it's like a lot of what troubles me about people in general is like, what do you do when you love someone who's bad? Like, what do you do when your dad is like a terrible monster? Like, how do you handle it? You can't, it's not, actual lived moral situations are often just like so complicated and sticky. And so that's kind of what interests me the most. And it means that I am often portraying people doing ugly things and making scenarios where it's really hard to tell who's in the right. And I think that if I were writing YA, I would want to have a clearer stance kind of about right and wrong than I do when I'm writing for an adult audience, when I feel very free to just be as ambiguous and to complicate it as much as I want. I think I write so much about teenagers because I think it's just because my kids are young, and only now do I feel like I could write convincingly about sort of the mommy years. And so, and a lot of times my books span like good 10-year chunks of time. And so I have to start when they're teenagers in order to get them, to their late 20s, early 30s. But I also think like, I think that teenage time is you're so open. And it also is this time in terms of friendships. And I write a lot about friendship where you don't yet have those close relationships with lovers. And so your friends, those relationships have this monumental, incredibly intimate quality, like a love relationship. And, there's nobody who knows you quite as well as someone who knew you when you were 17, it's like a special way of knowing someone. And that always really interests me. So I think that's another reason I gravitate towards young people.
Something that it gets talked a lot about in publishing right now is own voices, which for those watching that don't know what that is, it's someone writing authentically a story about someone's experience from their own experience. And all three of you have written from the perspective of gay or bisexual young men. And I'm curious just like what spurred that choice for all of you, and then what that process was like and sort of navigating that, and figuring out what story you wanted to tell there, why you wanted to tell it from that perspective, and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, so for us, it was autobiography. That one is told from Tanner's point of view, and he's a bisexual boy. He's 17 at the beginning of the book. And I identify as bi. So it was important for me that that was a piece of his identity. And Christina, before we published, she worked in a junior high counseling office. And she worked with a lot of teenagers. Most of the kids, and she could probably speak to this better than I could, but that would come into her office and spend time with her were boys. And a couple of them, clearly identified as queer and believed for whatever reason that their parents would rather have a dead kid than a gay one, even though that was absolutely not true. And so I think for us, autobiography was kind of a love letter to those boys that Christina had sort of helped raise and had spent a lot of time with when she was working at the junior high. And so it felt like a natural story for us to pick up for a number of reasons. I don't know if there's something you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, Sebastian is gay and a boy, obviously, and he's Mormon, and I am neither of those, but I have grown up most of my life in Utah, and I have family that is Mormon. And so that's something that I felt like I could really speak on. And then obviously Lo is bi and grew up in the Bay Area. But yeah, this book was sort of, I didn't get to see the happily ever after for all of these kids. And so that's sort of what this was. And it was really wonderful to have some kids come back later and say, I didn't really know this about myself then, but I picked up your book and like I felt seen, and I saw that you could see me even then, and that to know that you sort of like loved me even then, even though I didn't know those things about myself. And so it was just like, that's been one of the most amazing parts about that book.
Yeah, we get more letters about that book than all of
Than
the other
anything.
ones combined. We have 26 books, and that one gets more letters than all of the rest of them combined together.
Yep.
So,
Wow, that's so cool. I also am bisexual. And so and a lot of Michael's bisexuality is directly, it's like some of the more, I don't tend to make autobiographical plots, but a lot of that and I avoid it. And so kind of what happened was I started out telling the story about Bunny, and I knew that it was about female violence. And she's sort of this giantess who's very physically powerful. And I kept trying to tell the story from her point of view, and she just couldn't see herself well enough to tell us what was going on. She has like no sense of irony. And so she was sort of experiencing everything that was happening to her as just pain. And there wasn't this filtering layer. And so then it was really just as dumb as like I was sitting on my couch, like staring out the window. And I thought, what if she had a neighbor? And the moment that I sort of found Michael, the voice just sprang and sort of took over. And I think it's just that he's a lot like meaner than I ever let myself be. So this like repressed meanness just sort of came out. And so I found writing him and his voice to be really natural. And he kept kind of like bringing up the sex stuff. And I kept being like, no, this is a book about violence. Like it's not about sex. But the more that I wrote it, the more that I kept seeing violence and sex as just these specialized forms of touching, that they were really like part of just physical contact with other people and ways that you're trying to get your emotions across to other people through your body. And it started to make more sense to me, like why those two themes had to kind of intersect and what Michael was bringing to the plot sort of thematically. And so that's sort of how he came to be. And so I let he like meets men online and has these sort of like somewhat anonymous affairs. And that's very much like my lived experience, because for the majority of my 20s, I was sort of in denial, where I was having romantic relationships with men, but then having sexual relationships with women and thinking that I could keep those two things separate. And so I kind of gave him some of that.
CeeLo, you're in the business of delivering happy endings. Rufi, perhaps not happy endings, but at least a sense of resolution or peace. For all of you, how do you find your sense of an ending? I mean, do you work backwards from it, or what is that process?
I think a lot of times for us, we don't know exactly what it looks like until we get about halfway through the book.
Yeah.
And we try and outline the first half of the book so that we know, I mean, obviously we want to know the characters. We want to know how they meet. We want to know enough about them to know why they're great for each other. We want to know what conflicts are keeping them apart. But sometimes we don't know how they overcome that until we start writing them, because it takes a little while for us to figure out who they are once we get into their heads. So we usually,
If we outline all the way,
Yeah.
we always have to
always
redo
change
it.
Yeah. We just
Always.
every book we're like, well, how does one make a book? Like, this is such a mystery.
Like, you would think we get to that like 3/4 point and we're like, okay, that's good for now,
Yeah.
in our outlining process. And you would think that's just us being like, whew, okay, no. But honestly, I swear, every book where we've had a couple where we're like, no, this is the way it ends. But I think for the most part, when we write like, oh, and then this at the end, we always have to redo it. And because if we don't, sometimes we find ourselves like trying to connect the dots to make that thing happen, and then it just does not read real. So we've learned that lesson the hard way.
I just want to shut that out for a second and say, I think people can assume that maybe writing romance or something with the automatically prescribed happy ending is formulaic or somehow easier, but obviously that is not the case.
Because you want it to be believable. You want the readers to care and to feel like they are. I mean, here's the thing, because I said we have this contract with the readers, everybody knows they're going to end up together, but you need readers to feel at some point like maybe they don't this time. And you want them to be worried that they're not going to get exactly what they want and then deliver exactly what they want. And you also would like it if that thing was not what they expected to want,
Yep.
So it is hard to surprise people in a genre where surprises aren't really welcome. So I think that is what makes it tricky sometimes.
I also think sometimes we think we know what we want, and then life gives us something else and it ends up being better. And sometimes that happens in a story too.
Rufi, what about you? Do you work towards an ending, or does it just sort of like pop up and slap you in the face when you get there?
I've only had one book where I felt like I knew definitively how it ended. I know a lot of times, like plot wise, where I think that the bulk of the action stops kind of, but there's always that tricky, like the action being over is not the same thing as resolution, and trying to figure out what the emotional resolution even is can be really tricky, because a lot of times it's not like, I mean, I think that when I don't have like in a friendship, there's like in the Knockout Queen, they get back together, and I kept trying to understand as like friends, and they kind of reconnect as adults. And I kept trying to understand like what I wanted those scenes to contain. And finally, I realized I had in this one scene that Michael says that she doesn't have to be good. And I was like, oh, that's what it's about. Like, that's what the whole book is about. But I feel like you have to write it in order to, like, it's like you have to hide it from yourself while you're writing it, because otherwise you couldn't do it. It's like not looking down when you're doing a tightrope or something. And so a lot of times the ending is a place where I'm grappling with what the whole thing even is, and sort of like looking to try and understand what this thing is that I made. And so that can make landing and ending really tricky, because it's sort of interfacing with the part that you haven't let yourself see.
I love the idea that the action ending is very different than the resolution too, because I think like obviously we write very different books than you do, but one of the things we struggle with is once it's settled, like in our case that they're together, whatever, how do you wrap that up in a way that's satisfying but not like twee, you know, like we don't
or
want it.
anticlimactic.
Yeah, like you just don't, well, and also we just don't want the ending to feel like it falls into soft focus. And I think sometimes it's hard to wrap up a book in a way that feels satisfying without it feeling trite. And so that is always such a struggle.
I think it's sort of at the core of what interests me about stories in general, though. Like, I think I became a fiction writer because I didn't understand how story worked at all. Like, and there's nothing more maddening to me than reading Aristotle's Poetics, where he's like, a beginning is the thing where there's nothing before it, and then an ending is the thing after which nothing follows. And I'm like, well, that is not a definition. That is a tautology, and it's not helpful at all as instructions on how to do this. But it gets really abstract and complicated when you're thinking about what a narrative journey is and how you make that magic kind of happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's that phrase, a sense of an ending, right? Because it's, not a true ending, at least not for every character, unless it's like Hamlet and everybody dies.
Spoiler alert, Maureen.
500 years spoiler alert.
Just kidding.
It, like, for most people, it is a sense of an ending. It's some sort of a punctuation mark on something, but not actually a true ending. So that's, I imagine, very complicated to figure out, like, where do I place this piece of punctuation in this character's life that I've devised? As we've already kind of discussed, you all write about young people, whether that's teens or people in their 20s. And within that, you all explore themes of sexuality and desire, whether that's to more, positive, pleasurable ends, or to more violent ends. What do you think keeps you coming back to those themes, and where do your ideas usually come from?
I mean, I think, initially we started out with a series that was very, very sexual. The Beautiful series is erotic romance. And a lot of that was kind of in your face, like women going after what they want sexually. And we created a lot of heroes who were very supportive of that journey for women. Some of them were, more sort of alpha about it and others not. But I think for us, it was really fun to explore that as a theme of, like, how many ways can we write women finding themselves through sexual relationships? How many different kinds of women can we explore? And I think creating different heroines, like our first heroine, Chloe, was very brassy and strong and kind of in your face about stuff. And our second heroine, Sarah, was much more shy and kind of internal. And so it was really fun for us to play a little bit with those archetypes of, like, how can a woman who's so different from this other character and this other character kind of end up in this place where she's very happy with her life and her relationship, especially sexually. And it was just fun to play with that. But I think, as our stories and our worlds got bigger, they are out of the bedroom a little bit more, and they're finding themselves in spaces that are not just sexual. And so that's been, we get asked a lot, like, are you ever going to write books as sexy as that first series again? And we would, if it fit the characters that we're thinking about. But I think once you try and make your stories a little bit bigger, your world's a little bit bigger, just by default, they get out of the bedroom more. And so we will always write about women. The core story for us every time is about her journey, the heroine's journey, right? But the way that she gets from her starting point to her happily ever after, sometimes it'll be a sexual story, and sometimes it'll be a little bit more personal. Sometimes it's professional. Just depends on what she needs.
I think that, again, since for me, the way that I get my ideas is sort of like being a collector or something. And so you just hear about something, and then it sort of like bothers you, and it's like a pebble in your shoe, and you just keep thinking about it and thinking about it. And then it stays sometimes in my head for years. And then I'll find another weird pebble that seems like it matches, and then I'll start gluing them together. And so a lot of times I'm not thinking about necessarily romantic love or sexuality, but I do think that the things that interest me about human beings and the things that trouble me are often involve those things. And so the rocks that I wind up collecting often wind up kind of, I mean, I guess I think it's like such a core part of being a human being, is trying to answer those questions about how you fit in emotionally with other people and how you fit in sexually. And so I think especially because I'm so kind of obsessed with like the impossibility of moral judgment, then sex provides lots of really interesting kind of ambiguities. Um, but I would say a lot of, like, for me in this book in particular, Bunny was based on, there was a drunk girl at a party when I was like 18, and she was a female boxer, and she accidentally got locked in the bathroom, like she couldn't understand how the doorknob worked, and then she broke the sink. And it just was, I just thought about her for like literally decades, and then other things like sort of accrued, and gradually it all comes together. But I would actually be really interested in hearing how you guys like nurture ideas together. Like I've never gotten to really work with a writing partner, and I'm very curious and delighted by the idea and how it works.
I mean, it works better when it's not a pandemic, because honestly, a lot of what we do is we get together and we just like talk about the characters that we want to write a story about. And, you know, it takes like several days for those voices to come together and for us to, we usually start with one character and then we figure out who's the person they fall in love with and why. But it's like, you know, I mean, Christina's my best friend legitimately, not just because we're doing this together. And so it's so fun to just sit in my house or her house and be cooking for a few days together and like hanging out outside in her backyard and just throwing ideas around. It's like one of my favorite parts of the process, and we haven't been able to do it this year, really.
And like Maureen had said, you know, when we think about our audience, in the beginning, our audience was each other. You know, it was really about, like, I think sometimes people are surprised that we're actually such good friends. But like she's my favorite person. And in the beginning, it was just writing something that was going to make her laugh or make her blush, or, you know, my favorite thing in the world is when I write something and then she puts that line in my text box and like, you know, because it cracked her up or she's still thinking about it or something. And so it really is, I think, something magic that happens between us, because we've had friends that have done, you know, have co-authored before and it hasn't worked out. I just think it has to be the like perfect mix of very different personalities, but that are also complementary. Yeah. I can't explain it at all because we're so different.
Yeah.
But I'm okay.
Well,
You
I was gonna say, like, yeah, I probably the same question as me. So once you've had that brainstorming session and you've come together, like, what is the actual nuts and bolts of that writing process for both of you? Like, do you divide up perspectives or chapters? How does that work?
Yeah, so if we're writing a book with dual point of view, we'll just we each choose a character and go, and it just depends on who thinks, you know, we can do one of the other characters better. But we have a lot of books that are just a single point of view, and so we generally will just take turns. Like, I'll do one, she'll do two, I'll do three, she'll, you know, and sometimes we have multiple things going on. I mean, you know, like there've been a few years where we had like 2 or 3 or 4 books coming out. And so it's an all hands on deck situation. deck situation. All hands on deck. And in that case, like really, we just, sometimes I just keep going and she's working on something else. Or sometimes, you know, she has to like do the drafting and I'm editing a different book. So, you know, it's like we've learned to be really flexible. And I think what's funny is whenever we start a book, we legitimately are like, how can we do this? Has it been, are we going to be revealed to be frauds finally? Like, we don't know how to write a book. So
Yeah, every outlining session is different. Where like just this last one, it's like, oh well, what if we did on Post-its and well, okay, wait, what if we had wrapping paper? We could write on, and it's like you would think we have this figured out by now.
Wrapping paper is not a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's a
We,
good
like,
idea.
Put it up on the big window and then you write on the back. It was great.
Yeah.
I love it. Rufi, what's your writing process like? I assume more solitary.
Yes, it's much lonelier. Well, so I kind of have to, I spend a lot of time thinking about a book, like maybe like years. I'll have sort of like a little shell of an idea that keeps it's just in the back of my mind. And then when I go to try and write it, I will have to kind of write in act one over and over again to figure out the characters and the voice. And then once I have that kind of opening, that first like 50, 60 pages, then I'll go through and try and actually plot it out and figure out, just like with note cards. I like note cards because you're never expected to be brilliant on a note card. The bar is very low. And that's where I like to stay and at least start there where there's no pressure for anything to be perfect. And you can like, and so I move them around and stuff on like a cork board and try and understand how the time of like the book is going to work, like what span of time I'm dealing with and what the main sort of points of the action are and what the shape of it's going to be. And then from there, I just go. And a lot of times that part is really fast, but especially if I have access to big, long chunks of time. And I prefer to write laying down with my laptop on my lap. I don't like anyone to be in the house because like I will like say the dialogue out loud and do the voices and stuff. And I sound like psychotic. And I often will make myself laugh. This sounds very like gross and self-aggrandizing, but that is like a huge part of it for me, is just cracking myself up. And so I really like it to be completely alone. So you can imagine quarantine has been a little bit challenging for me on the aloneness spectrum. But that is, and I've gotten over it. It turns out that I can just like let my family hear my creepy voices and it's fine.
For all of you, California is often an important setting in your novels. Why?
Loth lives in California. My real dad was in the Navy, so I was there for a while, and I swear I've just spent the rest of my life trying to get back. I think because I'm in Utah and Lo is in California.
It's really why she's riding with me. She's playing the long con. She's just like eventually gonna. I love California. I love San Diego. It's a very special place to me, in part because that's where Christina and I first met. But I have family down there, and I spent a lot of time there when I was growing up. And Dating You, Hating You takes place in LA because it's kind of an LA based town. They're Hollywood agents. But I mean, we do have books in Chicago and New York. The one that we're writing right now takes place in the Canyonland National Park in Utah. So it's, I think we just like to play around with spaces that are familiar to us.
I think that I like fully consider myself a regional writer and consider myself like a Californian writer. And I think it really, when I was like very young and first writing fiction, the idea that I was supposed to write something that was in the same category as like Tolstoy or something was very intimidating. And so deciding that the rest of the world was not even what I was trying to talk about. I'm talking about this one very small place where I grew up, made it so that I could be authentic and honest and also like more unafraid and to just try and describe the people that I saw and that I knew and the way that their lives worked. And so for me, like narrowing the scope of what I talked about made it so that I could get brave enough to talk at all, kind of.
I mean, I totally consider myself to be like Californian. And I'm not
claiming it.
Well, for all of you, do you think there's something innate about the state? I mean, obviously it's a very big state and pockets of it are so different. And Rufi, you've primarily been in Orange County and Southern California, but Zilo, you've written in San Francisco and Orange County and LA and all over the state. So it's a little broader, but is there something about it as a place that you think like you're trying to say, or that helps you say something about your characters?
I mean, California is fascinating because we have everything here. I mean, we're, like what, the fifth largest economy in the world. It's like this amazing, we have some of the most amazing cities. San Francisco and LA are so different and they're both so fantastic. I grew up in Berkeley, and so I have a real love for Northern California. But I think what's fun is that, I came to graduate school here in Orange County, and I never left. I grew up really hating Southern California. I sort of thought Southern California was like water wasting and, shallow and all this stuff. And it's just not true. Like, you find your place and you put down roots. And so I like writing love letters to different California locations, I think is one of the things that we try and do because we love it here.
Yeah, I think that California appeals to me. I mean, in part because it is what I know, and so that makes it easier in terms of incorporating stories that are authentic to me. But I think it's also this land of fantasy anyway, sort of the whole idea of the state. And I feel like, I mean, it's like even like the state's named after a place in a novel, right? Like a fictional island, California. And so like it is this sort of imaginary place already, I think. And I feel like so much of the idealism of and also honestly like the tech takeover of San Francisco and the sort of like insane materialism of Southern California and Hollywood. And it's so much of California to me feels like it's about different fantasies that people are having and image making and reality being like weirdly moldable. And all of those themes interest me a lot. And California lends itself to kind of exploring those things.
What is the most renewing or reassuring piece of feedback you've ever received from a reader?
I think we've got a lot this year. I think in 2020, people just needed happy. And I don't think that, I don't think we've ever got so much kind of like overwhelming, loving feedback about, thanking us for giving them an escape as we have sort of in 2020. People didn't realize how much they needed to just have something happy.
Yeah, I do love the letters from teenagers like all over the world about autobiography, and it's like for a lot of especially kids that grow up really connected to some faiths, to the church, and they grow up queer. I feel like when a teenager says to us it's the first time they felt seen in a book, or they felt like they understood something about themselves, or they felt that somebody else understood what they were feeling, that's so huge. I mean, it really is like the best feeling. So I keep those.
Yeah, I think it's very much the same. I remember like the first letter that I got that just like blew me away with Girls from Corona Del Mar was a girl who was like, I finished your book and I just moved into my first apartment and I don't have Wi-Fi. So I went onto the roof of my building. And if I lean far enough over the edge with my phone, I can get Wi-Fi so that I can send you this email, because I just have to tell you that like this book, and the idea that like there was this girl that I had affected so that she was on a roof somewhere. This was a power that I had never foreseen myself as having. Kind of like there's a, like all very well and good. You're like, yes, I want to write stories. And then I want other people to want to buy them and read them, right? This is like the fundamental premise of trying to become a writer. And yet when you're actually doing it, like even just the fact that somebody is willing to take 8 to 10 hours of their life to read things that you wrote down is so like humbling kind of, and just, it blows me away every single time. And it feels like, you're in your own little like dark closet of your consciousness, like hammering away at the nothingness. And then you hear these voices back and they're like, you heard me. They think magically that you heard them, but really they heard you. and it's insane to me. It's so magical.
Well, we're coming close to the end of our time, but I want to end on a series of rapid fire questions that I think are always a little fun and give a bit more insight into the panelists. And I'm going to start with, what is your favorite place to write?
I can only write at my desk.
Yeah.
I'm so boring. I mean, I like to say that I work at Starbucks or something, but because I miss it. But I mean, if I really have to get something done, I have to be sitting at my desk.
I think some of my best stuff is when I wake up at like 2 a.m. with like just a ton of words in my head and I write them on my phone. I wouldn't say it's my favorite place to write, but it's often the favorite things that come out of my brain. So
I love it.
That's wonderful. I have to take 1 cup of coffee and reheat it so many times that it gets that kind of like gummy layer on top. And and then I need to be completely recumbent on the sofa in the living room, but there's windows so that I can keep an eye on the crows and see if anybody does anything interesting out there. And then that's how I like to do it.
Who is your favorite author or one of your favorite authors?
Oh my gosh. I mean,
I love
What?
Mary Roach. She writes nonfiction and she's just like, I love her so much. She does a lot of sciencey stuff. She wrote Stiff and Bonk. And I mean, she's just like amazing. I love her stuff.
I remember reading Anna and the French Kiss and by Stephanie Perkins and being like, this, I want to write things that make people feel like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many writers that I am obsessed with, and that like the moment that their latest book comes out, I race and buy it. But I would say, man, Jean Smiley, Louise Erdrich, Ann Patchett. I know for me, like a big sort of turning point was figuring out that I had to like leaven the melodrama of my imagination with the humor, and that's how it was gonna work, and that I needed to like actively try and become a comedic writer. And it sort of came about in part reading The Family Fang by Kevin Wilson, because I was so mad. I read it and I was so mad that someone had clearly written the book that they wanted to write. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
I was like still trying to write the book I thought somebody else wanted me to write. And I was just so pissed off that he was so obviously having such a good time.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, maybe I should try and do that. And so that was like very formative for me. I think John Irving was also
Oh God, I love John
influence.
Irving.
Yeah.
Who's someone who inspires professional envy in you, for better or worse?
Lo. Every day I'm like, I wish that I could write like Lo. I wish that I could think like Lo, organize like Lo. Totally.
You're so cute. Rufi.
Oh, I think it's funny. I think it's always like the writers who like I wish that I wrote that kind of thing, but I just so don't. Like Elizabeth Strout kind of comes to mind because she's so like subtle and understated, and like not like everything that I write is like over flourished and decorated and like technicolor and as like gooey as I can make it. And there's an austerity kind of, but also this incredible emotional tenderness to her work that every single time I'm just like, how are you doing this? It seems like magic to me. And so I think it's for the writers that that do very different things than me are the ones that I kind of envy the most.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think for me, I was thinking about it while you're speaking, and I think like Laini Taylor, she's so amazing because I mean, her writing is so beautiful. Every single word is so perfect. And I think, I've read her online talking about her process and how hard it is to write and how long it takes her. And I think for me, there's a little bit of envy for that because I tend to just like pound stuff out and write it really fast. And then my brain kind of moves on from it. And she spends so much time thinking about things and really like nurturing it and working it over and over and over. And I sometimes think that if I did a little bit more of that, maybe the stuff that we did would be better. I mean, I love our books, but everybody looks at their stuff and thinks like, I bet I could do that better next time. So I think, looking at somebody like Lainey, who just almost like obsesses about every word, I know it causes her a lot of stress, but when I think about her process, I think maybe a little bit more of that wouldn't hurt, me.
Because we're in a pandemic and we can't visit our favorite places, what is your favorite bookstore?
Bookstores.
So many.
I know, I miss them.
I love the Rip Bodice in
Yeah, I was
Culver
just gonna say
City.
that.
It's great. I mean, you can go in and be like, I would like a gay cowboy story that where they have at least 4 pets and
And he's a beekeeper on the side.
yeah,
they're
and they'd be like,
They're like, I got it.
yeah,
I got 2.
yeah. And I also really love the Tattered Cover in Denver. It's like such an amazing store.
Really cool store.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I love, I guess this is so boring, but my local indies, because they're the store that you go to. And so then you wind up like making friends with the booksellers and feeling like you have this personal connection and they get to know your taste. And suddenly they're like, hey, you would like this. And that always seems magical. So for me, those stores really are Book Soup and Pages, which is in Manhattan Beach. When I lived in Washington, D.C., it wound up being the Curious Iguana in Frederick, which is this like tiny little bookstore that is so magical and where they like manage, it's like a hub for this community. It's amazing. But I would give anything just to take a stroll through Parnassus Books right now.
Yeah. Lastly, would you rather be gifted the Beast library from Beauty and the Beast or be given a couple $1 million to create the bookstore of your dreams?
I think I would curate my own store.
Yeah, I would curate my own, I think.
I'm only torn because I would be such a poor businesswoman that I would doubtless just it's not in my nature to be good at running a bookstore, but it's like very compelling fantasy. I guess since it's a fantasy question, then I will also go with the bookstore.
I think I just couldn't resist the Beast library. Like
I know.
as much as it'd be nice to like make your own place, it'd be just like, no, this is already done. We're good.
We'll come visit you
Yeah.
there, Maureen.
Okay. All right. Well, that was all of my questions. Thank you to the 3 of you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Maureen. You were awesome.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you for having us.
Hello, I'm Bobby Cooper. Karen and I would like to thank you for attending our free author event. On behalf of ELPA, we hope you enjoyed authors Christina Loren and Rufi Thorpe and the great discussion led by moderator Maureen Lee Lenker. We thank these talented ladies for participating in our inaugural virtual event. And we encourage you to purchase their books through our longtime partner, Barnes & Noble, by calling 714-871-9855. Purchases benefit Alpha's many worthwhile philanthropies. Books have been a great escape during these challenging times, and we all are grateful for them. Take care, stay safe, and happy reading.